And what ultimately happened at the Last Supper, and its long and very beautiful roots, is none other than Dr. Roy Showman. He is, as I said, just a longtime friend of the program. It's great to have him here with us. Professor, thank you for your writings, and thanks for your time. It's good to talk with you today.
Thanks. This is one of my absolute favorite topics because, as you know, I'm a Jew in the Catholic Church, a Jewish convert, and I think that Judaism was transformed into the Catholic Church. I don't think I converted religions. I think the religion itself was transformed. And when and where was it transformed? It was transformed at the Last Supper, which was at one and the same time a Passover Seder meal and the first Catholic Mass. So, you're just hitting the nail right on the head of the center of my interests.
Well, that's such a great point to bring up. It's not as if though, you converted. I think maybe you could speak to that just for a moment. There's this beautiful bridge between the Old Testament and New Testament. Of course, that's Jesus Christ. And you're right. When's the summit, the pinnacle of that? The Last Supper. Speak to that if you could. Talk a little bit about that. And perhaps, I don't know, if other brothers and sisters of the Jewish faith who've come to see the things the way you've seen it. I know you wrote a book on 16 Jews who've seen that, but how common is this worldview?
It's universal among all of the Jews that I know who have become Catholic. Certainly, I think probably even the ones who have just become non-Catholic Christians, but all of the Catholic Jews in the Catholic Church that I know definitely see it the same way. And if I may, let me say why it's so appropriate that it took place at a Passover Seder, which was a Mass. If I may begin there?
It's all, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. Okay, sure. Because, first of all, the Passover Seder is the celebration of Passover. What's Passover? Passover is a celebration of the slavery of the Jews in Egypt. In Jewish theology, Passover was always understood, the exodus of the Jews from Egypt was always understood as a picture in advance of the coming of the Messiah. As a matter of fact, in Jewish theology, Moses was referred to as the first Redeemer, and the Messiah was referred to as the second Redeemer. And Jewish theology always said that when the second Redeemer comes, he has to come on Passover, because that's when the first Redeemer came. So Passover was always an anticipated celebration of the coming of the Messiah. In Christian theology, it's even more directly evident because from the earliest Christians, one of them that comes to mind is Saint Cyril of Alexandria, I believe it was, or may it be of Jerusalem. He pointed out that the entire story of the exodus of the Jews from Egypt was a picture of Christianity in advance. The Jews' slavery to the Pharaoh in Egypt was a picture of mankind's slavery to the power of Satan. The Pharaoh was a picture of Satan. The Jews were liberated from the power of Pharaoh by crossing the waters of the Red Sea. That was always seen as a picture of the Christian who's liberated from the power of Satan by passing through the waters of baptism. The Jews wandered through the desert for 40 years on the way to the promised land, Jerusalem. That was always seen as a picture of the Christians wandering through the desert of this life, so to speak, for 40 or 60 or 80 years on the way to the true promised land, of course, heaven, the heavenly Jerusalem. And what miraculously sustained the Jews during their 40 years in the desert? The miraculous bread from heaven, manna, which, of course, it was a picture of the Eucharist. And as you mentioned earlier in the show, Jesus himself made that comparison in John 6, when he said that your fathers ate manna in the wilderness, but they died nonetheless. But I am the true bread from heaven. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood has life eternal. So you couldn't have a more vibrant picture of the coming of Christ and the victory of Christ than the Passover Seder essentially being the first Mass. And of course, the manna, which was the central miraculous bread from heaven in the context of Passover and the Exodus, became the Eucharist, which is the central miraculous bread from heaven in Christianity.
I love that, the new manna from heaven. And I think that's such an important feature of Jewish scripture and tradition. You know, the ancient Jews not only feasted and lived on that, sustained them, but today it's with the Eucharist. and of course represents us today. But, take us through that Last Supper, if you could. What Christ did, how he communicated these truths to his apostles, and how that, how the ancient roots were manifested, of course, how it is manifested, I should say, today in our own liturgy.
Well, the rubrics of the Catholic Mass, the sequence of the Catholic Mass, follows quite closely on the sequence of the synagogue service, the course of the prayers and the readings. And as you know, that even part of the canon of the Mass is drawn from the Jewish blessing over wine and bread. I frankly am not sure. You see all these other incidences of the apostles, around Jesus, and Jesus is always saying, "I can't believe you guys don't get it, do you?" And so I'm not sure. I mean, the Last Supper was pretty intense occasion. I'm not sure how much was evident to the apostles then and there, and how much only kind of dawned on them in retrospect.
Yeah, I was always wondering, Professor, just about the fact that Our Lady, the Mother of Christ, and the women were not present. And my understanding is that, Jewish social convention would have dictated that women be present at a Seder meal. So why weren't they there? And what was Christ saying to us?
Okay, well, you teed up the ball, so I can certainly hit it. Because one dimension of that, of course, is that the Last Supper was also the institution of the priesthood. And, of course, women are not invited to the priesthood, although if I can paraphrase St. John Paul II, he said the same faculty which in men enables them to be priests and bring basically heaven to earth in the Eucharist, in women allows them to basically bring human life from heaven to earth in conceiving a child. So anyway, I just want to throw that in because, of course, the Catholic Church is anything but male chauvinist. The accounts that I tend to take most seriously about the Last Supper suggest that the women were in an adjoining room and participating in the Seder, so to speak, at a bit of a distance, which would not be surprising because even in synagogues today, Jewish synagogues, if it's a strictly religious version of Judaism, the women sit separately. They don't sit mixed with the men.
So it was nothing. There was nothing more to that than that. Where were the women? Where was Our Lady? Where was Mary Magdalene? What were they doing on this?
Well, I lost the videotape. There are a number of visionary saints who have seen especially the Passion of Christ, Anne Catherine Emmerich, Mary of Agreda, and so forth. And my memory of them is that they generally say that they were in an adjoining room and that they partook of the Passover lamb, but they were at a separate table in a neighboring room.
Yeah. Professor, today we live in a time where I think it's 73% of the number, maybe higher, might be lower, it tends to vacillate. Percentage of Catholics themselves don't believe in the true presence. Now, I know people of other faiths, it might be hard to get their head around. They may look at it as symbolic to this in remembrance of me. And as I pointed out when I began today, our bishops are embarking on a major campaign to revitalize devotion to the Eucharist. This is the source and the summit of our faith. How did we get so lost? Why do you think people are so confused over this, and what do you see happening in the not-too-distant future in terms of getting that devotion and respect that the Eucharist certainly deserves?
Well, that's a huge issue and a huge question. But I would say, first of all, coming from a Jewish perspective, there is nothing easy to understand about the truths of the Catholic faith. And certainly there's nothing easy to understand about the fact that when the priest confects the Eucharist on the altar, it becomes the body, blood, soul, and divinity of God. And as you know, also, you mentioned John 6. Some of Jesus' disciples walked away when he said, I am the true bread which comes from heaven, and you have to eat my flesh and drink my blood. It's not it's not something that's actually comprehensible to the human intellect. I think it's actually a gift of faith to believe it. I'm not sure if anyone can really understand it. Maybe St. Thomas Aquinas came close or something. So I'm not surprised that it's very difficult to believe. Rationally, I think it's not possible to believe. And I think that many fewer people have a very deep faith today, in part because of sin. Because, excuse me, but how many Catholics are following the rules of the church to stay out of a state of mortal sin? Certainly, if you look at Congress and the Senate, it doesn't look like a very high percentage.
Yeah, that really is true. It's an excellent point. Well, I'm very hopeful for the future. I think there'll be greater emphasis put on it, and I think hand in hand with greater devotion to the Eucharist has to come a greater exercise of the sacrament of reconciliation, that great sacrament of mercy. And we can get those two great sacraments working. I think lives will be changed, and the country will be a better place. We only have a moment left here on this Holy Thursday, and I want to give it to you. I know you wrote a number of books. There may be people who are considering learning more about the Catholic faith, especially some of your Jewish brothers and sisters. What would you recommend, and what would you like to leave those who are listening tonight regarding both the priesthood and the Eucharist?
Wow. I like the classic saints, so to speak, the Curé of Ars and Saint Julian Aymard and so forth. And Herman Cohen, who was a Jewish convert, who was he was a miraculous conversion in front of the Blessed Sacrament. But in any case, I really just like the classics. I do want, since I only have a moment left, to add one thing to what you said. It's absolutely true, of course, about more attention paid to the Eucharist and more frequent use of the sacrament of confession and so forth. But the sacrament of confession only works if you're aware of what a sin is and if you confess your sins. And there's also has to be a catechesis, especially in the realm of sexual sin, remarriage, fornication, adultery, and so forth. There really has to be, I think, a new catechesis in the reality of those sins, because if people don't even realize that they're in a state of mortal sin, then going to confession actually doesn't do them that much good.
It's so true. Maybe it looks to be a great series for me to do on the air. Maybe we'll have you back. We can go through some of that. It's a great point. So many people going blindly, down the path of life and not even recognizing the seriousness of their state at times. Professor, thank you for being with us. I hope you have a very blessed Triduum and a very joyful Easter if we don't have a chance to talk.
Likewise, and also to everyone listening, I send you my prayers for a wonderful Triduum and joyful Easter. So thank you very much for this opportunity, Drew.